in some ways, this is good, and I'll explain that. But in other ways, this is bad.
In this video, Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk takes a look at a recent article in the New York Times about this push to create a liberal Joe Rogan. You know, the Democrats want to try and find a way to build out this incredible social media machine that helped Trump win last time. And Kyle Kulinski does a good job of breaking this all down. Of course, Kyle Kulinski is an independent media personality himself, so he has an insider's view on the whole subject. Let's take a look at this together, and then I will have some opinions and want to know what you think in the comments.
So there's a really interesting story in the New York Times here that I wanted to share with you, and I have conflicting feelings on this. The title here is Democrats Throw Money at a Problem, Countering GOP Clout Online. At private gatherings, strategists and donors are swapping ideas to help the party capture the digital mojo that helped President Trump win. Yes, there's a price tag. So basically the idea here is, and they say this outright at some points, we want to create the liberal Joe Rogan, and we're willing to throw millions and millions of dollars out there to try to create the liberal Joe Rogan. So as you can see here, the picture of this article has Brian Tyler Cohen. So they say the following: 6 months after the Democratic Party's crushing 2024 defeat, the party's mega donors are being inundated with overtures to spend tens of millions of dollars to develop an army of left-leaning online influencers. At donor retreats and in-pitch documents seen by the New York Times, liberal strategists are pushing the party's rich backers to reopen their wallets for a cavalcade of projects to help Democrats, as the cliche now goes, find the next Joe Rogan. The proposals, the scope of which has not been previously reported, are meant to energize glum donors and persuade them that they can compete culturally with President Trump if only they can throw enough money at the problem. Democrats widely believe they must grow more creative in stoking online enthusiasm for their candidates, particularly in less outwardly political forms of media like sports or lifestyle podcasts. That's interesting. So they're not just looking for like outright political outlets and political commentators. They want people who code left-wing and lean left-wing and maybe touch on politics every now and then, but they might focus primarily on sports or lifestyle or self-help or working out or whatever the case is. Many now take it as gospel that Mr. Trump's victory last year came in part because he cultivated an ecosystem of supporters on YouTube, TikTok, and podcasts, in addition to the many Trump-friendly hosts on Fox News. The quiet effort amounts to an audacious, skeptics might say desperate, bet that Democrats can buy more cultural relevance online, despite the fact that casually right-leaning touchstones like Mr. Rogan's podcast were not built by political donors and did not rise overnight. Wealthy donors tend to move in packs, and some jaded liberals worry that the excitement could cause money to flow into projects that are not fully fleshed out. They argue that the latest pitches on the left are coming from operatives who are hungry to meet donors' demand for a shiny new object. In a break from the past, some of the Democrats' new ventures are for-profit companies, and so far, there are still more ideas than hard committed money. One Democratic operative described compiling a spreadsheet of 26 active projects related to creators, over a dozen of which are new since November, but a few of the efforts have ties to major donors that could give them liftoff. It needs to start with the legitimate investments, said Marissa McBride, a Democratic strategist who leads a donor group called Mind the Gap. But she added, there has to be something that is happening organically as well. All right, so now they go on in this piece to describe, first of all, the price tags. There's a lot of big numbers being thrown around here, right? They want to raise $45 million over the next 4 years for one thing. And there's different approaches. So some of them basically want to cultivate it from scratch. Others want to see what's already out there in the ecosystem and then bet on certain horses and help certain horses and try to do it that way. So don't build it from scratch, build it from the ground up. Take what's already out there and try to make a move that way, try to prop people up that way. So that's the general idea of it here. And here's my take on it. I'm curious what all you guys think of it. But in some ways, this is good, and I'll explain that. But in other ways, this is bad. So it's good because there needs to be a liberal and left-wing equivalent of, say, the Daily Wire, right? The commentators on the right, and this is what people really don't understand in this business, if you're not part of it, but the commentators on the right, they are swimming in cash. And it's always been like that, because stop and think about what a right-wing commentator is. A right-wing commentator, they are propagandists through and through, where you have right-wing billionaires who want to spread their propaganda, want to spread their ideology.
I just want to pause here. That's so important to underline, right? Kyle Kulinski's going to go on and sort of take a different tack than this. But why are right-wing commentators so prevalent and so well-funded? Because they are propagandists. They are for sale. That is what they do. Right? Whether it's Rush Limbaugh and he's selling pills, or, Dr. Oz who's selling his, pills, right? It's not about journalism. It's not about trying to get to the bottom of the truth. It's not trying to, spend a lot of time fact checking and making sure that the things are right. It's about promoting as hard as they can, as widely as they can, the messaging that they are being paid to propagate.
They pay these people to basically go out there and say, billionaires are great, capitalism is great, definitely don't raise taxes on those people. Here, let's be distracted. Let's talk about trans people. Let's talk about immigrants. Let me try to rile you up and scapegoat some people and get your focus over there. And so, to moneyed interests, they view an investment in right-wing political pundits as like one of the first things they got to do. If they want to maintain their money, they want to maintain their power, they want to maintain their control. So it's always been like that. Rush Limbaugh was a foot soldier for the billionaires, funded by right-wing think tanks, right? Glenn Beck, same thing. Michael Savage, same thing. If some of these names don't sound familiar to you, it's probably because I'm ancient. But this was the first iteration of what we're talking about with right-wing media. It was talk radio and Fox News, and they were flush with cash. In fact, they would do dirty tricks like you would have one of these people would release a book, Bill O'Reilly, Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, whoever. They'd release a book, and then a right-wing think tank would spend millions of dollars buying that book in bulk. And then when they had some gathering for their right-wing think tank, they would hand out the books for free to everybody who attended it. But buying the book in bulk meant what? Meant, boom, you'd be on the New York Times bestseller list, you'd be in the top 5, and then that creates chatter, that creates buzz, then you get everybody else to talk about the book, which in turn leads to more sales of the book. So you're astroturfing this notion of like, hey, Bill O'Reilly's ideas are really fucking popular, Sean Hannity's ideas are really popular, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck. If they're not popular, why do they keep, hitting number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list? It was all astroturfed. It was all fake. It was all because of the power of big money, right? And to this day, the right-wingers, they have a lot of money in that ecosystem. If you are singing the tune the billionaires want you to sing, they will reward you for it. That's how it works. And so there's just never been, forget a left-wing answer to that. There hasn't even been a liberal answer to that, right? Right now, we are seeing the rise of the Midas Touch Network, for example, and there's some others, but they're never going to compete when dollar for dollar, because as a general rule, both the liberals and leftists, they have a position that restricts the power of the mega wealthy. And so the mega wealthy aren't going to want to fund somebody who's like, hey, I want to raise your taxes, and every dollar you make over $5 million a year, I want to tax it 90%. What mega wealthy person is going to be like, yeah, let me fund that? They don't want to do it. Now, there are some really wealthy people who happen to be left-wing, and, there are a couple groups like patriotic millionaires. There's a few of them, but like it's such a tiny percentage of billionaires that like there's just not as much money on the left, and there never will be. Right? Just like Steven Crowder was saying it was like slavery that he got a $50 million contract opportunity from the Daily Wire. Are you fucking kidding me? Everybody who's on the left who does their show saw a $50 million contract. Like, he's getting fucking like NBA contract numbers. And we're over here like, bro, I got a Patreon, dog. Like, what are you talking about? And that it is what it is. Like, this is what it's like on the right. They swim in that big money. They just do. So this is good in the sense that all of that money gets these right-wing outlets really far, and there's never been a liberal or left-wing answer to these right-wing outlets. And part of the reason for that is because of the lack of funding, the lack of the lack of investment, the lack of having a framework and a foundation and an infrastructure whereby somebody can make it as a left-wing or liberal pundit. Like, it truly is, and I know because I've been doing this shit full-time since like 2012, it really is sink or swim. It really is like, hey, you're on your own, go ahead and try your best, and if it doesn't work, what are you going to do? Like, they don't have the same sort of, ironically, billionaire-provided safety nets that the people on the right have. So on the one hand, I totally get this idea. You absolutely want to create something that can rival the power of the propped up right-wing influence network, right? But at the same time, big money, sort of by its nature, is corrupting. And that's why, for example, on this show, I've made a pledge to never take big money. I've never had a conversation with an advertiser. Doing this show full-time since 2012, I've never talked to an advertiser. I've never done an ad read. I promise you guys that the way we make money for this show is your Patreon donations, your Substack support for Crystal Kyle and friends. Outside of that, we just have the default ads on YouTube. So there's a buffer between me and any of the advertisers. I've made that promise to you because I feel like that's the only way I can do a show which feels pure, which feels like the incentives are correct, which feels like I don't have there's no weird puppet strings behind the scenes where I got to try to appease this advertiser or don't say that thing about that advertiser. There's a reason I've set it up like that. And so on the flip side, big money is by its nature sort of corrupting. So almost like anybody who would accept that money, they're sort of agreeing to play that same dirty game that we go after the right for. And then the other point is it possible for them to execute this idea in a way that I think is palatable and net positive? Yes, it is. It is possible for them to do this and make it palatable and make it a net good overall. That is possible. Having said that, I have zero trust in wealthy liberal donors executing this idea properly.
And I think Kyle doesn't say this explicitly, but I think what he's getting at here is to do it properly, you would need to give those news personalities independence. You'd need to give them true independence, right? Because real journalism is going to get to the truth, even when it's a truth that you don't find particularly flattering or doesn't necessarily promote all of your agenda or even implicates you somehow, right? I mean, he goes on to drill into this in a slightly different way, but I think Kyle Kulinski is absolutely right here. It's possible for it to still be a net good, but an imperfect net good. And I think what he's going to go on to say is he finds it unlikely that even the left, even moneyed people on the left, aren't going to want to sponsor and pay for that kind of truly independent journalism that might bite them. Everybody, if you're rich, most people have got some skeletons or some, pet issues that they don't want dragged out into the light. So I kind of agree with Kyle Kulinski here.
Because they're absolutely going to pick figureheads and they're going to fund people who maybe refuse to talk about issues like Gaza, right? They don't want you to take the controversial stance where you tell the truth when most people are not telling the truth. They don't want you to do that. So they're going to want you to avoid the real hot button issues. So avoid talking about Gaza, avoid talking about war, avoid getting into corruption and how, yes, the right and Republicans are the most corrupt and it's not close. But that doesn't mean I'm going to bite my tongue if I see a Democrat being corrupt, right? And we got to call that out too. And my guess is they wouldn't take kindly to that, right? They probably won't take kindly to conversations about gerontocracy, where you have these 8 Democrats have died in office in the past 3 months. And it's because they're ancient and they don't want to let go of their power. And then they die and that ends up helping the Republicans and it's easier for the Republicans to pass bills. So ultimately, I fear that whoever these liberal billionaires will fund will probably be party hacks. And that's sort of like on the right, you can get away with making it as a party hack because they are more authoritarian by their nature, right? They look at how they treat Trump. It is literally a cult at this point. It's not even close. And so you can get away with, in fact, you could be rewarded for rah, rah, go daddy Trump. We love you. Let me drink the Kool-Aid, right? You can get away with that. On the liberal side and the left-wing side, you can't really get away with that as much. You can't because we're less authoritarian. And you want people who are more independent thinkers. You want people who are not just going to go along to get along and toe the line, right? And so, look, as I said, is it possible that they can execute this idea and it can work out and it could be a net positive? yes, that is possible, and I don't want to downgrade. I don't want to begrudge that. I want to be clear about that. But I have very little to no faith that they will actually execute this properly. And what I think they'll do is, because these people are not experts in this field, they don't understand it, they don't really know it, they'll probably pick people to back or start people from scratch that refuse to talk about hot button issues, refuse to talk about real shit, refuse to break with the party line, so ultimately they just become party hacks. And that would make it so it's doomed to failure, right? It's doomed to failure if that's the direction you're going to go. So, I'm curious what all you guys think. Clearly, I have mixed feelings on this. On the one hand, you just need something on the liberal side and the left-wing side that rivals the power of the Daily Wire. I mean, look, here's a start. This is a very simple thing that could be done to fix the problem, which nobody's even bringing up, nobody's even talking about. On the right, like, if you go watch Fox News, there's not just the Fox News host that you see, right? But they also bring on their right-wing internet celebrities. They bring on their right-wing internet political commentators. So, like, you will see somebody who's got a big Twitter account and does right-wing politics, or somebody with a YouTube show who does right-wing politics. Fox will bring those people on and try to make them stars, right? And use the power of that person's audience and try to grow that person's audience. So it's like, there's an echo chamber there that gets the message out more. Like, when you look at MSNBC, they don't invite, I mean, they did, thank God they actually had Emma Vigeland on last week. Eamon had Emma on, but Eamon's a rare example of somebody who's willing to do that. But like, these networks, they're not inviting on me, they're not inviting on Crystal, they're not inviting on Mike Figueredo of the Humanist Report or David Dole. They're not, like, that's one simple thing you could do, is take the people who are already doing genuine left-wing commentary and are honest and authentic and have some semblance of a following, bring them on to CNN, bring them on to MSNBC, and don't be afraid to copy that Fox business model, in the sense that the Fox business model, they have an ideology that they push 24/7, and that ideology is Trumpism. You should have MSNBC and CNN, they should fully embrace social democracy, and they should have people arguing for that aggressively, arguing the problem are not immigrants and trans people, the problem are the billionaires. But instead, it's a very, like, wishy-washy, both sides, false equivalence thing. That's what, a lot of those channels do. And like I said, they don't nurture their own version of the internet pundit. They sort of excommunicate them and want nothing to do with them and look down on them, right? So that's one simple thing that could be done, which would absolutely make a difference. But it doesn't even occur to them. It looks like they want to either fund something from the ground up or pick certain people who are doing it and are maybe not too offensive and prop them up. And I don't know. I'm worried about the execution of this, right? Now, having said that, I will point out, it's actually been, the Midas Touch example has been very interesting to me, because clearly these are, three guys from Long Island who put together this political show and made it. And at first I was a little skeptical of them, because it did feel like just party line, down the line type stuff, which wasn't really ever breaking with the orthodoxy. But then I saw they were live covering every single Bernie and AOC anti-oligarchy rally. And it was in that moment that I realized, oh shit, their net effect is actually tremendously positive. Because it's not just, we're going to shit on the Republicans, we're going to shit on Trump, we're going to tell you every horrible thing that they've done. But then it also became, and by the way, we're on this team. The team that tells you the billionaires are the problem, the corruption is the problem, and we're going to fight back against it. And so it was in that moment I realized they have a net positive impact on the body politic. And so, but again, they made it more on their own ground up type shit. Now, does that change if liberal billionaire money comes in? Do they soften a little bit? Do they change some positions? Like, are they less likely to cover the AOC Bernie rally and more likely to talk about Alyssa Slotkin in a positive light if that big money comes in? I don't know. So this is all very tricky. But in some ways, this could be good. In other ways, I'm terrified that the execution is going to be off and is going to lead to a bigger problem, right? Because usually the wealthy donors they will do everything they can. They want like Ezra Klein and the abundance movement, rebranded neoliberalism. They want that to be the future of the Democrats. They want Alyssa Slotkin to be the future of the Democrats. They don't want Bernie. They don't want AOC. They don't want true left-wing politics. They don't want people talking about Gaza and being anti-war. They don't want that. And so it's a very important moment where the voices that are currently in the lead on the Democratic side, all those voices that are out there talking about Gaza, talking about the problem with billionaires and corruption, those are the voices we need to not lose sight that is the vision. Don't let anybody pollute that. Don't let anybody change the conversation. Don't let anybody soften the message, right? And in this moment, our side is winning. Our side is winning. And I hope that the effort that they're talking about is not an effort that undermines that and softens the vision and rebrands neoliberalism and gives us a weak Democratic Party. That's my main fear. So I don't know. We'll see in the execution and how it works out. But let's hope for the best. Let's hope that the execution is on point. Let's hope that these aren't just down the line party hacks. Let's hope that these are truth tellers. And let's hope they blow up because they're authentic and they're genuinely captivating. And, you know, that's an area where, unfortunately, the left is far behind. You got assholes like Joe Rogan, for whatever reason, captivated millions of people. And now I think he's getting washed, but it's still a long way to go. And really, the goal, it shouldn't be to find the liberal Joe Rogan. The real goal is let's find the anti-Joe Rogan. That's what it is at its core.
That's so interesting. I just find this so interesting because everything is so up in the air and the mainstream media is under attack. I think that the independent media is under attack too in a different way. I mean, part of it is that this administration just hasn't quite gotten around to it in the same way yet. But Kyle Kulinski is a guy that has been sort of fiercely independent and made that a centerpiece. You know, agree with him or not, a lot of it's opinion. He's reporting the news. I don't know that he calls himself a journalist, but he's definitely somebody who talks about these issues online and brings a certain amount of clarity to it. I like Kyle Kulinski a lot, and I want to know what you think. I mean, is Kyle Kulinski someone you agree with here? Do you agree with the Democratic establishment that, you know, you need to fight fire with fire, and what we need is we need a Joe Rogan on the left, or what, or something other? What are the other, you know, Kyle Kulinski ends by saying the anti-Joe Rogan. I don't know. Like, I really don't know. Let me know what you think in the comment section.